Andy's going to talk about the impact of all this data and the general life of and the impact of change on our community. I will be listening very, very intently because change is coming, I know. So welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks for a great intro. Yeah, I've got to live up to that now, haven't I? So, right, let me just adjust my screen so I've not got all myself in the picture. So, thank you, everyone. So, as Steve said, I'm the Exec Director of the Major Projects Authority, and I'm also part of the Project Data Analytics Task Force, and I lead on the engagement workstream. So, I'll include a little bit about that later. Steve gave an excellent introduction to the Major Projects Association. So just a little bit more for those who may be unfamiliar. We're about 100 organisations, so it's a membership body for organisations rather than individuals. And we've got a sort of the full 360 of organisations who get involved in major projects. So that's government, industry, funders, advisors, academia, and so on. And it also cuts across professions, so policy, law, commercial finance, engineering, technology, and project management. So you know, recognizing that multiple professions and multiple bodies need to come together to deliver major projects. But I'm not here today to talk about that. I'm here to talk about my thoughts on how data analytics can transform project delivery. And so I'd like to think that I'm sort of representing sort of users and clients in terms of my thinking here, rather than the solution providers in terms of what's the art of the possible out there. So I'm doing it from a need rather than an opportunity perspective. So just get going. I'm going to talk about a bit of context first, and then why I believe that, you know, project delivery does need transforming. I've got some data about that, and then moving on to challenges in terms of data analytics in projects, what things we need to do to unlock the potential that's there, the opportunities that can provide us, and then a little advert, if you like, for the work of the Project Data Analytics Task Force. So in terms of what's going on at the moment, so leading up to the current decade, individuals and organizations were already facing an accelerated pace of change. It's been mentioned a few times already, but that's been brought on by things like the urgency of action on climate change, aging populations. So you can see the picture there. We believe that the world's first 200-year-old person has already been born. That was from a few years ago, and in preparing for today, I sort of Googled it again, and I now think that potentially the world's first 1,000-year-old person may have been born as well. So massive change to what's going to happen to our societies as we live for significantly longer than we have so far. And they've also got changes in terms of geopolitics and sort of digital transformation. If we fast forward to 2020, sort of governments, NGOs, think tanks and the like around the world are all predicting seismic change for when we emerge from the depressed levels of economic activity caused by the pandemic. And there's a general consensus that, you know, like the depression of the 1930s, that the recovery is going to be investment-led and will require organizations to reimagine their business or operating models. So it's not just about building lots of dams, but it's about how we reinvent organizations too. So that's going to lead to, you know, a big uptick in capital investments over the next, decade, I suspect, and more immediately, you know, significant business transformation for many organizations. And that's going to be at scale and also pace. We're going to have to do some of these things quickly so that we can recycle the, economic benefit back into, that treasury coffers and elsewhere to then pay for second, third, fourth phase of the investments. So if there was ever, a time to, for great project performance, I would say it is now. I think project management has always been important. Now it's very, very important. So in terms of, if we have a look at project performance, what do we see? And I know this has been modeled regularly. In fact, when Steve mentioned I was involved in the update to Prince 2, we had a lot of input from back in sort of 2007 leading up to the 2009 input. We had like 30 years of studies that we trawled through like the Standish report and various others. And interestingly, performance hadn't significantly improved over that time. But if we look at the typical triple measure of time, cost and quality, so one of the recent PMI surveys, I think, put that at around about 57% from their analysis of projects that deliver with those three. If we then add in benefits, so we haven't just delivered the output, but we've delivered the outcomes as well, and turn those into the desired benefits that the sponsors or the commissioners of the project are expecting, it drops significantly. And then if we think about sustainability as well, so think about all the oil and gas platforms that were built through the 50s, 60s and 70s, and some of our nuclear installations around the world that were built in the same sort of timescale. We're now spending as much again to decommission them as we did to construct them in the first place. That wasn't really factored into those business case models at the time. So if we look at these 5 aspects, there's again lots of studies around that show that performance is pretty low, unacceptably low. And there's some numbers around sort of Bent Flyberg's study recently was about 0.5% of major projects around the world deliver to these. So as a species, we're not very good at talking about percentages. So let me put it in another term. That's 1 in 200 projects delivering to their original goals when they were set out. So that's not great. And as the likes of sort of Stephen Carver would say that we wouldn't embark on a plane journey of those sorts of performances. So so the truth is, that sort of 0.5%, the good news is that there's huge room for improvement, and we can make a significant impact of that. But I've been thinking about for some time now, why, when I go back over those reports from the last 30, 40 years, we haven't really improved that. Some of it's because the complexity of what we're doing has improved over that time frame, but also it's because we're not very good at learning lessons, and that's something that Craig covered earlier about the challenges of learning lessons. So, again, if I look at the work I did on Prince 2, we did try to help with the learning of lessons. We introduced the principle of learning from experience. So what we did there is to say it was everyone's duty to go and seek lessons rather than to capture and share, and hopefully that would improve things. But there was still a challenge around even if you have that poor mindset, we need access to good data, and we also need the ability to intelligently process that data to gain applicable insight in order to make good decisions or good project strategies. And this is where the world of data analytics is really going to trigger some improvements in this area. So I mentioned before about the Project Data Analytics Task Force. So earlier this year, it was established. There was a group of 12 of us that helped to get that going. And we established it as an industry-led approach to unite the project community with the data analytics community, the data science community rather, around that common purpose of improving project performance through the use of data. And given that low bar, we've set quite an ambitious challenge of a 10-fold improvement within 5 years. But I'll cover a bit about that later. One of the things we have done, though, is in setting up the task force to look at some of the inherent challenges that are there, and sort of put those into sort of 3 broad buckets, so to speak. The first one around data, and there's 2 aspects here around data access and also data quality. So the challenge with data access is that whilst projects generate huge quantities of it, and the data tends to sit in silos, and that could be within a functional area within an organization or across sort of client, contractor, supply chain boundaries. And there isn't simply sort of that single collective data source for many projects. And there's that inherent curse as well of projects being temporary. It's interesting, Aviv talked about that sort of it being infrequent, subjective and inaccurate. So how do we make sense of that? And if we think about that inaccuracy aspect, getting access to good data rather than just any data is really important as well. So there's a lot of variability in units of measure. Secondly, data may be incomplete or limited to just dashboard report content. And lastly, it's often manipulated or just adjusted, which makes it difficult to compare like for like when we want to learn, in terms of how the different approaches or techniques or methods we've used has actually influenced project improvement. The second area around skills, I'll keep this one brief because I'm sort of aware of the time. The challenge here is that on the one hand, we find that project professionals do lack in general data literacy. It's not an area that has had huge investment in terms of their training as a part of getting your project management badges. And likewise, data scientists, we've been finding are more tuned into business as usual and routine operations than they are in longer life cycle activities like projects, or where the project life cycle sits across many organizations, so it's harder to get a handle on what's going on. In terms of solutions, I'm sort of here we're talking about sort of tools and practice, and we've obviously seen 3 updates today, so there's a lot going on here, but as I mentioned around the skills, there's a challenge here in that what we find, if although we've got sort of a window into what's possible there, if I was to do a general trawl around what's going on in terms of data analytics and machine learning and AI, the vast majority, 80–90% plus, is on business as usual activities, not these irregular, unusual activities. And that's partly because of the short cycle times and the repeatability of business as usual and operations. Sort of increases that investment appetite to put solutions together. So on an individual practitioner or project basis, we've got that additional sort of inherent curse, as I call it, of the long cycle time to get that feedback to apply new techniques based upon what we've learned. So although every project's unique, though, there are high degrees of similarity between them, and that's at a sort of functional or process level. So we can use data science, and that's the argument of the data analytics task force, to prioritize and leverage the similarities that we've got, so that every practitioner and everyone's project can learn from the hundreds or thousands of others where there's an element of equivalence. So there's much to gain from optimizing these practices, and it's something that we're encouraging people to come together like today and then sharing what's the art of the possible. So if I look at where improvements can be gained, I'm focusing on practice. And by practice, I mean really the actions and interactions and decisions of those people involved in projects. And if I then think about how can I look at practice, we can do it through things such as looking at the methods employed, or the model, delivery model that's in place, or the relationship between the organizations and what commercial frameworks are being used, or some of the approach and techniques that are being applied. And I mean, from my background, I would be focusing on project management practice rather than the project practice. So, some of the techniques we saw around these sort of hard hat videos of updating progress is great. Feeding that back into project management activities is an additional step that's really critical. We also need to think of methods and models and approach. They're not in isolation of the project's context. And it's really interesting. Craig showed that outcome map. It was really interesting. You had the sort of the wider context of supply chain and sort of market forces. So now we're talking about economic aspects as a context there. And I'm just sort of almost through at the moment reading the Mervyn King and John Kay book. I don't know if you can see that on the video, on radical uncertainty. And their assertion is that you can't model the economy. It's not possible to do if you're basing it on deterministic and probabilistic calculations. So we've got that challenge of context. And also it's about who is involved in that practice as well. So that's not just project management practitioners, but the engineers, the sponsors, the commercial folk, and all the different sort of organizational types, as I mentioned earlier, involved in sort of delivery of major projects. So I look at this opportunities to improve and you know, think about at the one end of the spectrum, there are those actions, interactions, and decisions where there's an element of deterministic, routine, and repetitive tasks. And there's also at the other end of the spectrum, there's aspects that are complex, ambiguous, and uncertain. So what I'd like to do now, if Steve, if I've got a minute or so, is that okay?
Yes, a couple of minutes, please, Andy. Yeah.
A couple of minutes. Okay, great. Yep. So perhaps in the chat window, people can just give some thoughts around the element of project management practice at that deterministic, routine, repetitive level, where we've got opportunities to improve through, you know, the types of solutions available that we saw today, or others that are out there. What are the thoughts of those who are here now? We've got some coming in. I can't see the chat.
We do indeed.
Okay. That's if you can just read some of those out then for me, Yoshi.
Yeah, do you want me to start from the start, or?
No, just in terms of any comments in terms of the areas that we can improve around the deterministic routine level.
No, I think the questions are more circulated around your talk, Andy.
Oh, okay, I'll cover those later then. Thanks, Joshi. Okay, so one of the things that we've been looking at, I mentioned about the skills challenge as a part of the data analytics task force. We're also looking at what the impact with skills and roles will be. So, you know, where we see solutions and opportunities being addressed in data analytics, we are seeing certainly some of the roles at the routine, repetitive level, where we can bring in things like RPA, meaning that there will be less demand for some of the roles involved in project management. But then we are seeing that with the insights and the analysis that are provided, I was fascinated by the infodemic and the R rate on projects earlier. That's great. You know, on the right-hand side of the picture here, where we can actually now get more of the discussions and analysis and thinking around what are those aspects that are complex, ambiguous, and uncertain, applying informed judgment to them. So I mentioned the task force. I just wrap up now. So it was launched in September 2020. We produced a white paper setting out that ambition, and we've got 6 work streams around data access, data quality, skills, research, solutions, and engagement. And we're always looking for volunteers to get involved. So if you're interested in helping out in any of those 6 work streams, do get in touch, and you've got some of the contact details there.